Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls her age. While her friends spent their evenings chatting about boys and makeup, she found herself drawn to books about history and documentaries about prison reform. At 19, she had already decided she wanted to work in the criminal justice system. Not as a lawyer or judge, but as someone who could make a real difference in the lives of people society had forgotten. The opportunity came sooner than expected when the local correctional facility posted an opening for a junior administrative assistant. The job wasn't glamorous, mostly filing paperwork and organizing visitor schedules, but Sarah saw it as her foot in the door. She applied immediately, despite her mother's concerns about a young woman working in such an environment. Her first day at Riverside Correctional Center was overwhelming. The massive concrete walls, the sound of heavy metal doors slamming shut, and the constant buzz of security cameras made her stomach flutter with nervousness. The warden, Mrs. Thompson, was a stern woman in her 50s who had worked in corrections for over 20 years. She gave Sarah a brief tour, explaining the strict protocols that governed every aspect of life within the facility. The rules were clear and non-negotiable. Staff members were forbidden from personal conversations with inmates. They could not accept gifts, letters, or any form of personal communication. Physical contact was strictly prohibited except in emergency situations. Sarah listened carefully, understanding that these boundaries existed for everyone's safety and the integrity of the system. During her second week, Sarah was assigned to work in the education wing, where inmates could earn their high school diplomas or learn trade skills. It was here that she first noticed Marcus Williams, a 25-year-old man serving a 5-year sentence for burglary. Unlike many of the other inmates who seemed angry or defeated, Marcus spent every free moment in the library, reading everything from classic literature to books about business and entrepreneurship. What struck Sarah most about Marcus was his quiet determination. While other inmates socialized or watched television during free time, he could be found studying at a small table in the corner of the library. He never caused trouble, always followed the rules, and treated the staff with respectful politeness. There was something in his eyes that reminded Sarah of herself, a hunger for something better, a refusal to let circumstances define his future. The education coordinator, Mr. Peterson, mentioned that Marcus was one of their most dedicated students. He had already earned his GED and was working toward completing several vocational certifications. Marcus had also started a reading group for other inmates, encouraging them to use their time productively. His transformation from someone who had made serious mistakes to a person focused on rehabilitation was exactly the kind of success story that had drawn Sarah to this work. As weeks passed, Sarah found herself paying more attention to Marcus than she should have. She noticed how he helped younger inmates with their reading, how he mediated disputes without involving the guards, and how he maintained his dignity despite the harsh realities of prison life. There was a gentleness about him that seemed out of place in such a harsh environment, yet he commanded respect from both inmates and staff. One afternoon, while organizing educational files, Sarah overheard Marcus talking to another inmate about his plans for after release. He spoke passionately about wanting to start a nonprofit organization to help at-risk youth avoid the mistakes he had made. He talked about the importance of education and second chances, his voice filled with genuine conviction. Sarah found herself moved by his sincerity and his commitment to turning his life around. The facility had a strict policy about maintaining professional distance, but Sarah couldn't help but admire Marcus's dedication to self-improvement. She began to notice small details about his daily routine, how he always thanked the staff politely, how he kept his cell area meticulously clean, and how he never participated in the gossip or negativity that often circulated among the inmates. During her lunch breaks, Sarah would sometimes sit where she could observe the education wing through the security glass. She told herself she was just interested in the rehabilitation process, but deep down she knew there was something more personal about her attention to Marcus. She was witnessing something remarkable, a person truly changing their life from the inside out. Other staff members began to notice Sarah's interest in the education programs. Mrs. Thompson complimented her on her dedication to understanding the rehabilitation process, not knowing that Sarah's motivation was becoming more personal than professional. Sarah felt conflicted about her growing feelings. knowing that any personal involvement with an inmate could end her career before it really began. As autumn turned to winter, the facility felt even more isolated and cold. Sarah had been working there for 3 months and had settled into her routine, but she found herself looking forward to the moments when she might catch a glimpse of Marcus in the education wing. She was careful to maintain her professional demeanor, but she couldn't deny that her interest in him was growing beyond mere admiration for his rehabilitation efforts. One December evening, as Sarah was leaving work, she overheard 2 guards discussing Marcus. They mentioned that he had received some devastating news from home, but had handled it with remarkable composure. Sarah's heart went out to him, and she found herself wondering what kind of bad news he had received. The thought of him dealing with additional pain while already serving his sentence troubled her more than it should have. That night, Sarah lay awake thinking about the ethical boundaries of her job and the unexpected feelings that were developing. She knew that caring about an inmate's well-being was different from developing personal feelings, but she was honest enough with herself to admit that her interest in Marcus had crossed that line. She was attracted to his intelligence, his determination, and his genuine desire to become a better person. The next morning, Sarah arrived at work with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. She had made a decision that would either be the most compassionate thing she had ever done, or the biggest mistake of her young career. She was going to find a way to let Marcus know that someone believed in his rehabilitation and his future, even if she couldn't do it directly. The opportunity came the following Tuesday, when Sarah was asked to deliver educational materials to the library. Marcus was there as usual, helping a younger inmate with his math homework. Sarah watched for a moment as he patiently explained a concept, his voice calm and encouraging. When the younger man finally understood the problem, Marcus smiled with genuine pride, as if the student's success was his own victory. Sarah approached the librarian's desk to deliver the materials, her heart beating faster than usual. She had planned this moment carefully, knowing that any direct interaction with Marcus would be noticed by the security cameras and could lead to serious consequences. Instead, she had decided to leave something that might reach him indirectly. Among the educational materials was a book about successful entrepreneurs who had overcome difficult backgrounds. Sarah had written a small note on a piece of paper and carefully placed it between the pages. The note simply said, "Your dedication to change is inspiring. Don't give up on your dreams. Someone believes in you." She hadn't signed it, hoping that the anonymity would protect both of them while still providing Marcus with the encouragement she felt he deserved. The librarian, Mrs. Rodriguez, was a kind woman in her 60s who had worked at the facility for 15 years. She had a reputation for being fair but firm with the inmates, and many of them respected her greatly. As Sarah handed over the materials, she mentioned casually that the book about entrepreneurs might be particularly interesting for inmates in the education program. Over the next few days, Sarah found herself anxiously wondering if Marcus had found the note and what his reaction might have been. She tried to maintain her normal routine, but she caught herself looking toward the education wing more frequently, hoping to see some sign that her message had reached him. On Friday afternoon, something unexpected happened. While Sarah was organizing files in the administrative office, Mrs. Rodriguez approached her desk with a concerned expression. She held a small piece of paper in her hand, and Sarah's stomach dropped as she recognized it as the note she had placed in the book. Mrs. Rodriguez sat down across from Sarah and spoke in a low, serious voice. She explained that Marcus had brought the note to her, worried that someone might be trying to compromise his good standing in the facility. He had been concerned that accepting such a personal message could jeopardize his upcoming parole hearing, which was scheduled for the following spring. Sarah felt her face flush with embarrassment and fear. She had intended to encourage Marcus, but instead she had put him in a difficult position. Mrs. Rodriguez continued, explaining that Marcus had specifically asked her to investigate where the note had come from, not to get anyone in trouble, but to ensure that his rehabilitation program wasn't being compromised by outside influences. The older woman's expression softened as she looked at Sarah. She had noticed the young woman's interest in the education programs and had assumed it was professional curiosity. Now she realized there might be something more personal involved. Mrs. Rodriguez had seen this situation before. Well-meaning staff members, who became emotionally invested in particular inmates' success stories. Sarah considered denying involvement, but she knew that lying would only make things worse. With tears forming in her eyes, she admitted that she had written the note. She explained her admiration for Marcus's dedication to change and her desire to encourage his efforts. She emphasized that she had never intended to compromise his position or violate facility protocols. Mrs. Rodriguez listened patiently, then shared her own observations about Marcus. She confirmed that he was indeed one of the most dedicated participants in the education program, and that his influence on other inmates had been overwhelmingly positive. She also mentioned that Marcus had specifically asked her to handle the situation discreetly, showing that he was more concerned about protecting the staff member who had tried to encourage him than about protecting himself. The conversation that followed was both difficult and enlightening. Mrs. Rodriguez explained the serious consequences that could result from personal relationships between staff and inmates, not just for careers but for the safety and security of everyone in the facility. She helped Sarah understand that her feelings, while understandable, could not be acted upon while Marcus was incarcerated. However, Mrs. Rodriguez also recognized the genuine nature of Sarah's concern for Marcus's rehabilitation. She suggested that if Sarah truly wanted to support his success, she could channel her energy into improving the education programs that benefited all inmates. She offered to mentor Sarah in developing more effective rehabilitation initiatives that could help many people like Marcus. Over the weekend, Sarah struggled with conflicting emotions. She was embarrassed by her breach of protocol and worried about potential consequences for her job. At the same time, she was touched by Marcus's response to the situation. Instead of taking advantage of her personal interest, he had immediately reported the note to ensure that proper procedures were followed. His integrity in handling the situation only increased her respect for him. Monday morning brought an unexpected development. Mrs. Thompson called Sarah into her office for what Sarah assumed would be a disciplinary meeting. Instead, the warden presented her with a proposal. The facility had received a grant to expand their education and rehabilitation programs, and they needed someone to coordinate these new initiatives. Mrs. Thompson had been impressed by Sarah's interest in rehabilitation and wanted to offer her the position. The new role would involve working directly with inmates in educational settings, but under strict supervision and with clear professional boundaries. Sarah would be responsible for developing programs that could help inmates prepare for successful reintegration into society after their release. It was exactly the kind of work she had hoped to do when she first applied for the job. Sarah accepted the position, understanding that it would require her to maintain even stricter professional standards. She would be working more closely with inmates like Marcus, but always within appropriate boundaries and with the goal of helping as many people as possible. The personal feelings she had developed would need to be channeled into professional dedication to rehabilitation work. As she left Mrs. Thompson's office, Sarah reflected on how the situation had unfolded. Her inappropriate personal interest in Marcus had led to a professional opportunity that could benefit many inmates. Sometimes, she thought, good things could come from mistakes if people were willing to learn from them and redirect their energy in positive directions. That afternoon, as Sarah began her new responsibilities, she saw Marcus in the library working with his reading group. He looked up as she passed by, and for just a moment their eyes met. Marcus nodded slightly in acknowledgement, a gesture that seemed to convey both understanding and respect for the professional boundaries that needed to be maintained. Sarah nodded back, knowing that their interaction would remain professional but that she could still support his success through her work with the education programs. In her new role as education coordinator, Sarah threw herself into developing programs that could genuinely help inmates prepare for life after release. She spent long hours researching best practices in rehabilitation, reaching out to community organizations, and designing curricula that would provide practical skills alongside academic education. Her personal feelings for Marcus became fuel for a broader passion to help all inmates succeed. The first major program Sarah implemented was a financial literacy course. She had observed that many inmates had never learned basic money management skills, which contributed to the poor decisions that led to their incarceration. Working with local bank representatives and financial counselors, she created a comprehensive program that covered everything from opening bank accounts to understanding credit and budgeting. Marcus was among the first to enroll in the financial literacy program. During the classes, Sarah maintained strict professional boundaries, treating him exactly like every other participant. However, she couldn't help but notice his thoughtful questions and his ability to help other inmates understand complex concepts. He had a natural teaching ability that made him valuable in group settings. As winter progressed into spring, Sarah's programs began showing measurable results. Inmates were earning certifications, improving their reading levels, and developing job skills that would serve them after release. The success of these initiatives caught the attention of the State Corrections Department, and Sarah was asked to present her methods at a statewide conference on prison rehabilitation. The recognition was gratifying, but Sarah's greatest satisfaction came from watching individual success stories unfold. She saw men who had been written off by society discover talents they never knew they had. She watched as education gave them hope for futures they had never imagined possible. Marcus was one of these success stories, but he was no longer the only one who captured her attention. One of the most challenging aspects of Sarah's new position was dealing with inmates who were resistant to change. Not everyone was like Marcus, eager to learn and improve. Some men had been in and out of prison for years and saw no point in education or rehabilitation programs. Sarah learned to be patient with these individuals, understanding that change had to come from within and couldn't be forced. During this time, Sarah also began to understand Marcus's background more clearly through his participation in various programs. She learned that he had grown up in foster care, aging out of the system at 18 with little support or guidance. His burglary conviction had come from a desperate attempt to pay for community college tuition after he lost his minimum wage job. The information helped explain his determination to educate himself and his genuine desire to help others avoid similar mistakes. As Marcus's parole hearing approached, Sarah found herself hoping for his success while maintaining professional distance. She had written a formal evaluation of his participation in the education programs, focusing solely on his academic achievements and his positive influence on other inmates. The report was factual and professional, but it clearly documented his transformation during his time in the facility. The parole hearing took place on a rainy Thursday in April. Sarah wasn't present for the proceedings, but she learned later that Marcus had presented his case eloquently, discussing his educational achievements and his concrete plans for reintegration into society. He had lined up a job with a nonprofit organization that helped at-risk youth, and he had been accepted into a community college program to complete his bachelor's degree. 2 days after the hearing, Mrs. Thompson called Sarah into her office with good news. Marcus's parole had been approved and he would be released the following month. The parole board had been impressed by his educational achievements and his clear commitment to rehabilitation. Sarah felt a mixture of happiness for Marcus's success and sadness that she would no longer see his positive influence in the education programs. Marcus's last few weeks at the facility were spent preparing other inmates to take over some of his responsibilities in the education wing. He had been instrumental in mentoring newer participants and helping them stay motivated in their studies. Sarah watched as he carefully transitioned his duties, ensuring that the programs would continue to function smoothly after his departure. During his final week, Marcus requested a meeting with Sarah to discuss the future of the education programs. The meeting took place in Mrs. Rodriguez's office with the librarian present to ensure proper protocols were followed. Marcus presented a detailed plan for expanding the peer mentoring system he had helped develop, complete with training materials and suggested procedures. The conversation was entirely professional, but Sarah was struck by Marcus's continued commitment to helping others even as he prepared for his own release. He spoke passionately about the importance of education in breaking the cycle of incarceration and suggested ways to connect the programs with community resources. His insights were valuable, and Sarah incorporated many of his suggestions into her ongoing program development. As the meeting concluded, Marcus thanked Sarah for her work in developing the education programs. He acknowledged that these opportunities had played a crucial role in his rehabilitation and preparation for release. His gratitude was sincere but appropriately distant, recognizing the professional boundaries that had been maintained throughout their interactions. On Marcus's last day at the facility, Sarah made sure to be working in a different area to avoid any awkward goodbyes or emotional moments. that might compromise their professional relationship. She learned later that he had left letters of encouragement for several of the inmates he had been mentoring, along with a donation of his personal books to the library. That evening, after Marcus had been released, Sarah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this point. Her initial inappropriate personal interest in one inmate had evolved into a career dedicated to helping many people rebuild their lives. She had learned valuable lessons about professional boundaries, but she had also discovered her true calling in rehabilitation work. The education programs continued to grow and succeed in the months following Marcus's release. Sarah received updates from various community organizations about former inmates who were thriving in their new lives, and she took pride in knowing that her work had contributed to their success. The personal feelings that had once seemed so important had been transformed into something much more meaningful and impactful. As summer approached, Sarah began planning new initiatives for the fall semester. She had learned that real change happened gradually, through consistent effort and genuine care for human potential. The lesson Marcus had taught her wasn't about romance or personal relationships, but about the power of education and second chances to transform lives. Her work had become her passion, and she was grateful for the unexpected path that had led her to this purpose. 6 months after Marcus's release, Sarah received an unexpected phone call at work. The voice on the other end was familiar, though she hadn't heard it in half a year. Marcus was calling to invite her to speak at a community event he was organizing for at-risk youth. His nonprofit organization had officially launched, and they were hosting their first major outreach program. The invitation was professional and appropriate, extended through proper channels with the approval of Sarah's supervisors. Marcus explained that he wanted someone from the corrections system to speak about rehabilitation programs and second chances. Sarah's reputation for developing successful education initiatives had spread throughout the local criminal justice community, making her a natural choice for the event. Sarah accepted the invitation, curious to see how Marcus was doing in his new life, and excited about the opportunity to promote rehabilitation programs to a broader audience. The event was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at a community center in the neighborhood where Marcus had grown up. Sarah prepared carefully for her presentation, focusing on success stories and statistics that demonstrated the effectiveness of education in reducing recidivism. The day of the event, Sarah arrived at the community center to find a bustling crowd of teenagers, parents, and community leaders. Marcus greeted her professionally, shaking her hand and thanking her for participating. He looked different in civilian clothes, more confident and relaxed than she had ever seen him. The transformation from inmate to community leader was remarkable to witness. As Sarah observed Marcus throughout the day, she was impressed by his natural leadership abilities and his genuine connection with the young people in attendance. He spoke openly about his mistakes and his time in prison, but he focused primarily on the lessons he had learned and the opportunities that education had provided. His message was powerful because it came from authentic experience. During her own presentation, Sarah shared statistics about successful rehabilitation programs and highlighted the importance of education in breaking cycles of crime and incarceration. She spoke about inmates she had worked with who had completely turned their lives around, though she was careful not to mention Marcus specifically. The audience was engaged and asked thoughtful questions about second chances and community support. After the formal presentations, Sarah had an opportunity to speak with Marcus more privately about his work with the nonprofit. He explained that they were focusing on providing mentorship and educational support to teenagers who were at risk of dropping out of school or getting involved with gangs. The organization had already connected dozens of young people with tutoring services and job training programs. Marcus also shared that he was excelling in his college courses and planned to earn a degree in social work. His goal was to eventually work within the correction system as a counselor or program coordinator, helping other inmates prepare for successful reintegration into society. Sarah was amazed by how clearly he had defined his purpose and how systematically he was working toward his goals. During their conversation, Marcus thanked Sarah again for her role in developing the education programs that had been so crucial to his rehabilitation. He mentioned that several other former inmates from the facility had also found success after participating in her programs. The impact of her work was extending far beyond what she had realized. As the event concluded, Sarah felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The personal feelings she had once harbored for Marcus had evolved into professional respect and admiration for his accomplishments. More importantly, she realized that her initial, emotional response to a situation had led her to discover her true calling in rehabilitation work. The following weeks brought several developments that reinforced Sarah's sense of purpose. She received a letter from the State Corrections Department offering her a promotion to a regional position overseeing rehabilitation programs at multiple facilities. The offer would mean more responsibility and higher pay, but it would also allow her to expand successful programs to help even more inmates. At the same time, Sarah's current facility was seeing remarkable results from the program she had implemented. Recidivism rates among participants in her education initiatives were significantly lower than the state average. The success was attracting attention from researchers and policymakers who were interested in replicating her methods at other institutions. One particularly gratifying development was the establishment of a scholarship fund for former inmates who wanted to pursue higher education. Marcus had been instrumental in organizing the fund, working with local businesses and community organizations to provide financial support for people transitioning from incarceration to college. Sarah served on the scholarship committee, reviewing applications and helping to select recipients. Through her work on the scholarship committee, Sarah met several other former inmates who had successfully rebuilt their lives after participating in rehabilitation programs. Each story reinforced her belief in the power of education and second chances to transform lives. She began to see patterns in successful reintegration and started developing new programs based on these insights. As autumn arrived, Sarah made the decision to accept the regional position. Her new role would involve traveling to different facilities, training staff, and implementing rehabilitation programs based on the model she had developed. It was a natural evolution of her career and an opportunity to multiply the impact of her work. During her last week at Riverside Correctional Center, Sarah received another call from Marcus. His nonprofit had received a major grant to expand their programs, and they were looking for an experienced educator to serve as their program director. He wanted to know if Sarah would be interested in leaving corrections work to join his organization full-time. The offer was tempting, representing a chance to work directly with at-risk youth before they entered the criminal justice system. However, Sarah realized that her passion lay in working within the correction system to help people who had already made mistakes. She believed that her greatest impact would come from continuing to develop rehabilitation programs for inmates. Sarah declined Marcus's job offer, but suggested ways their organizations could collaborate. She proposed partnerships between correctional facilities and his nonprofit that would provide continuity of support for inmates before and after their release. The idea excited both of them, and they began developing formal proposals for such collaborations. As Sarah prepared to leave for her new position, she reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought her to this point. What had begun as inappropriate personal feelings for an inmate had evolved into a career dedicated to rehabilitation and second chances. She had learned valuable lessons about professional boundaries, but more importantly, she had discovered the profound satisfaction that came from helping people rebuild their lives. The final surprise came during Sarah's farewell party at the facility. Mrs. Rodriguez presented her with a scrapbook containing letters and photos from former inmates who had participated in her programs. The collection included updates on their lives, expressions of gratitude, and stories of continued success. Marcus had contributed a letter describing how the education programs had changed his life and expressing his appreciation for Sarah's dedication to rehabilitation work. Reading through the letters, Sarah was moved to tears by the impact her work had achieved. She realized that her initial emotional response to Marcus's situation, while professionally inappropriate, had led her to discover her true purpose. Sometimes, she thought, the most meaningful careers began with unexpected feelings that were channeled into appropriate professional dedication. 2 years into her regional position, Sarah had successfully implemented her rehabilitation programs at 12 correctional facilities across the state. The results were consistently impressive, with participating inmates showing significantly lower rates of reoffending and higher rates of successful employment after release. Her work had caught the attention of national criminal justice reform organizations, and she was frequently invited to speak at conferences and training seminars. During this time, Sarah had maintained occasional professional contact with Marcus through their collaborative projects. His nonprofit had grown substantially, now serving hundreds of at-risk youth throughout the metropolitan area. They had partnered with several of Sarah's facilities to create transition programs that supported inmates both before and after their release dates. The collaboration between Sarah's rehabilitation programs and Marcus's community organization had become a model for other states. They had developed a comprehensive system that provided education and support to inmates during incarceration, followed by mentorship and practical assistance as they reintegrated into society. The partnership was featured in several academic studies and policy reports as an example of effective criminal justice reform. One significant development in their professional relationship occurred when Marcus completed his bachelor's degree in social work. He had maintained excellent grades while managing his nonprofit and had been accepted into a master's program specializing in criminal justice reform. Sarah wrote a professional recommendation letter for his graduate school application, focusing on his demonstrated leadership abilities and his commitment to helping others. As Marcus pursued his graduate studies, he began conducting research on rehabilitation programs, often collaborating with Sarah on data collection and analysis. Their working relationship had evolved into a true professional partnership, with both bringing unique perspectives to their shared goal of reducing recidivism and helping people rebuild their lives after incarceration. The success of their collaborative model attracted funding from several major foundations interested in criminal justice reform. Sarah and Marcus worked together to write grant proposals and develop expansion plans that would bring their programs to additional states. The process required numerous meetings and presentations, all conducted with the same professional boundaries they had maintained since Marcus's release. During one particularly significant meeting with potential funders, Marcus publicly credited Sarah's education programs with playing a crucial role in his successful rehabilitation. He spoke eloquently about the importance of treating inmates as people capable of change, rather than as criminals defined by their worst decisions. His testimony was powerful because it came from lived experience combined with academic knowledge and practical results. Sarah was moved by Marcus's words, but she was equally proud of the dozens of other success stories that had emerged from her programs. She had learned to see Marcus's transformation as one example of what was possible when people were given genuine opportunities for rehabilitation. Her personal feelings for him had long since evolved into professional respect and shared commitment to their work. As their programs continued to expand, Sarah and Marcus began facing new challenges. Political opposition to rehabilitation programs sometimes created obstacles to funding and implementation. Some critics argued that resources should be focused on punishment rather than education and support services. Sarah and Marcus learned to navigate these political dynamics while staying focused on their mission. One particularly difficult period came when a high-profile crime committed by a former inmate led to public criticism of rehabilitation programs. Sarah found herself defending her work in media interviews and legislative hearings, using data and success stories to counter emotional arguments for harsher policies. Marcus supported these efforts by organizing former program participants to share their stories with lawmakers and community leaders. The crisis actually strengthened their programs in the long run by forcing them to document their results more comprehensively and communicate their value more effectively. They developed sophisticated tracking systems that followed participants for years after their release, providing concrete evidence of reduced recidivism and increased employment rates. The data became powerful tools for advocacy and program expansion. As Sarah's career continued to advance, she was offered a position with the Federal Department of Justice to help develop national standards for prison rehabilitation programs. The opportunity would mean relocating to Washington, D.C., and working on policy at the highest levels of government. It represented the culmination of everything she had worked toward since her first day at Riverside Correctional Center. Before accepting the federal position, Sarah wanted to ensure that her state programs would continue successfully without her direct oversight. She spent months training her replacement and documenting all procedures and best practices. Marcus's organization committed to maintaining their collaborative partnerships, providing continuity for the community-based components of the programs. During Sarah's final week in her regional position, she and Marcus met to discuss the future of their collaborative work. They had scheduled the meeting at a coffee shop near the university where Marcus was completing his master's degree. As they reviewed transition plans and ongoing projects, Sarah reflected on how much their relationship had evolved since their first encounter at the correctional facility. The conversation was entirely professional, focused on program outcomes and future opportunities for expansion. However, there was an underlying current of mutual respect and shared purpose that made their working relationship particularly effective. They had both grown tremendously in their respective roles, and their collaboration had achieved results that neither could have accomplished alone. As they prepared to conclude their meeting, Marcus mentioned that he had been offered a teaching position at the university's criminal justice program. The position would allow him to train future professionals in rehabilitation methods while continuing to run his nonprofit organization. Sarah was pleased by the news, recognizing that Marcus's unique background and experience would bring valuable perspectives to academic criminal justice education. Sarah shared her own news about the federal position, explaining how it would allow her to influence national policy on prison rehabilitation. Marcus congratulated her on the opportunity and expressed confidence that her experience and proven results would help shape more effective approaches to criminal justice reform across the country. Their final collaboration in the state would be a comprehensive report documenting the success of their partnership model. The report would serve as a blueprint for other states interested in implementing similar programs. Working together on this final project, Sarah and Marcus created a detailed analysis of what had made their collaboration successful and how it could be replicated elsewhere. As Sarah prepared for her move to Washington, D.C., she felt a deep sense of satisfaction about the work she was leaving behind. Her programs had helped hundreds of inmates successfully reintegrate into society, and the partnership with Marcus's organization had created a sustainable model for continued success. What had begun as an inappropriate, personal interest had evolved into a professional relationship that was making a real difference in people's lives. The transformation of her feelings for Marcus represented a broader evolution in her understanding of meaningful work and personal fulfillment. She had learned that the most satisfying relationships were often professional partnerships built on shared values and common goals, rather than personal attraction or emotional attachment. 5 years after starting her position with the Federal Department of Justice, Sarah had become one of the nation's leading experts on prison rehabilitation programs. Her work had influenced policy changes across dozens of states, and the model she had developed with Marcus had been implemented in over 200 correctional facilities nationwide. The impact was measurable and significant, with participating facilities showing consistent reductions in recidivism rates. During her time in Washington, D.C., Sarah had maintained professional contact with Marcus, who had completed his master's degree and was now teaching at the university while continuing to run his expanded nonprofit organization. Their occasional email exchanges focused on program developments and research findings, maintaining the professional boundaries that had served them well throughout their collaboration. Marcus's academic career had flourished, with his research on community-based rehabilitation programs earning recognition from criminal justice scholars nationwide. He had published several papers analyzing the effectiveness of education and mentorship programs in reducing reoffending rates. His unique perspective as both a former inmate and a trained researcher brought credibility to his work that was helping to change academic conversations about criminal justice reform. The partnership between Sarah's federal initiatives and Marcus's community programs had evolved into a formal relationship between the Department of Justice and several universities conducting rehabilitation research. Marcus served on advisory committees that helped shape federal policy, bringing practical experience and community connections to high-level policy discussions. One significant milestone came when Sarah was invited to testify before Congress about the effectiveness of rehabilitation programs in reducing crime and saving taxpayer money. She presented comprehensive data showing that every dollar invested in education and support services for inmates saved several dollars in reduced incarceration costs and increased tax revenue from successfully employed former inmates. During her congressional testimony, Sarah referenced the collaborative model she had developed, though she was careful not to mention Marcus by name or share details that might compromise his privacy. She spoke about the importance of partnerships between correctional facilities and community organizations in creating seamless support systems for people transitioning from incarceration to productive citizenship. The testimony helped secure federal funding for a major expansion of rehabilitation programs nationwide. Sarah was tasked with overseeing the implementation of these new initiatives, working with state corrections departments and community organizations to ensure programs met federal standards while remaining responsive to local needs. As part of this expansion, Sarah found herself traveling frequently to visit facilities and meet with program coordinators. During one such trip to her home state, she scheduled a visit to Riverside Correctional Center, where her career in rehabilitation work had begun. The facility had continued to build on the programs she had started, and they now served as a training site for staff from other institutions. Walking through the familiar halls of Riverside, Sarah was struck by how much had changed since her first nervous day as a young administrative assistant. The education wing had been expanded significantly, with new classrooms, computer labs, and a library that was 3 times its original size. The transformation reflected a broader shift in how the facility approached rehabilitation and prisoner preparation for reintegration. Mrs. Rodriguez, now the head librarian, gave Sarah a tour of the expanded facilities. She shared stories of current inmates who were following paths similar to Marcus's, earning degrees and developing plans for contributing to their communities after release. The librarian mentioned that several former participants in Sarah's original programs had returned as volunteers and guest speakers, inspiring current inmates with their success stories. During her visit, Sarah learned that the facility was planning to establish a scholarship fund for former inmates pursuing higher education. The initiative was being organized by a committee that included Marcus as an advisory member, representing the community perspective on supporting successful reintegration. Sarah offered to help connect the scholarship fund with federal resources that might support their mission. The conversation about the scholarship fund led to a discussion about Marcus's current work and future plans. Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned that he was being considered for a promotion to department chair at the university, recognition of his growing influence in criminal justice education. She also shared that his nonprofit had become a model organization studied by similar groups across the country. As Sarah concluded her visit to Riverside, she reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this point in her career. The facility where she had made her first mistakes and learned her most important lessons was now a showcase for the rehabilitation approach she had helped develop. The personal feelings that had once seemed so significant had been transformed into professional accomplishments that were benefiting thousands of people. Later that evening, Sarah received an unexpected phone call from Marcus. He had heard about her visit to Riverside and wanted to update her on some exciting developments in his work. His nonprofit had been selected to receive a major federal grant that would allow them to expand their programs to 10 additional cities. The grant was part of the initiative Sarah had helped design at the federal level. Their conversation was warm but professional, filled with shared excitement about the opportunities for expansion and the potential impact on at-risk youth and former inmates. Marcus credited Sarah's federal work with creating the funding opportunities that were making such expansion possible. Sarah, in turn, praised Marcus's community-based approach as essential to the success of any rehabilitation initiative. As they discussed implementation plans for the new grant, Sarah and Marcus found themselves once again collaborating on program design and evaluation methods. Their partnership had evolved over the years, but the core elements remained the same: mutual respect, shared goals, and complementary expertise that made their work together more effective than either could achieve alone. Near the end of their conversation, Marcus mentioned that he was getting married the following spring to a fellow social worker he had met during his graduate studies. Sarah congratulated him warmly, genuinely pleased to hear about his personal happiness and continued growth. The news confirmed what she had long understood. Their relationship was meant to be professional rather than personal, and both of their lives had been enriched by maintaining appropriate boundaries. As Sarah hung up the phone, she felt a profound sense of completion and satisfaction. The young woman who had once written an inappropriate note to an inmate had grown into a national leader in criminal justice reform. The inappropriate feelings that had once seemed so overwhelming had been channeled into meaningful work that was changing lives and shaping policy. Looking ahead to the future, Sarah could see numerous opportunities for continued impact through her federal position. She was working on initiatives that would expand rehabilitation programs internationally, sharing American innovations with other countries while learning from their approaches. The work that had begun with one person's transformation had grown into a movement affecting thousands of lives around the world. The story of Sarah and Marcus had become a testament to the power of appropriate professional boundaries and the transformation that was possible when personal feelings were channeled into meaningful work. Their collaboration had demonstrated that the most impactful relationships were often built on shared purpose rather than personal attraction, and that professional respect could be more fulfilling and lasting than romantic attachment. As Sarah prepared for the next phase of her career, she carried with her the lessons learned from that first inappropriate note and the professional relationship that had grown from it. She had discovered that true fulfillment came not from personal relationships with individual inmates, but from systemic changes that could help entire populations of people rebuild their lives and contribute to their communities. The reaction to her protocol breach had indeed been unbelievable, leading to a career and impact she never could have imagined when she first walked through the doors of Riverside Correctional Center.